Will Errol Spence versus Terence Crawford be the fight of the decade? Alright, y'all, let's talk about it. Well, a lot of people are conversating about whether this is the biggest fight or if it'll be the fight of the decade. Are these two guys matching up the biggest fight that boxing can put together, basically? And I would say, for the most part, yes. I think it's the biggest fight in boxing. I don't know if I would call it the biggest fight of the decade. We still got a long way to go in this decade, so there could possibly be many great fights to come out of this decade. But at the present moment, is this the biggest fight in the sport of boxing? Yes, it is. I don't think there's another big fight that could be made besides maybe Wilder Fury 4. I think that would be a pretty big fight. You know, people seem to be still into Deontay Wilder. Even though I think if they fought again, I don't think he would make the adjustment, which is basically the box, work off the jab, be an Errol Spence of the heavyweight division. Are there any other fights that could be made? You know what? There's one fight that could trump pretty much every fight out there if they were to put it together. If one party would agree to making the fight, and I think we all know what fight that is, but I think a lot of people feel like because of the way the first one ended, that they feel like the second one will end the same way, but I beg to differ. And the fight I'm talking about is Maypac 2. You know, Maypac 2 set all type of records. It's the biggest fight in boxing history as far as sales. You know, the fanfare around the fight. You know, that is the biggest fight in boxing history. Nothing's probably ever going to top it. I don't know if anybody ever tried to top it except for those two guys. I mean, if they can get it back in the ring together, no other fight's going to do the numbers that fight would do. Now, there's a possibility you might see Pacquiao Spence or Pacquiao Crawford. So with Pacquiao Spence or Pacquiao Crawford, that could possibly be a bigger fight than Spence versus Crawford. A lot of people feel like Crawford's not very popular. Crawford's name doesn't hold a lot of weight. So even if you do put Spence and Crawford in the ring together, and a lot of people feel like this is the reason why we haven't got the fight up until this point, is that the fanfare is not as big as it should be. The dollar amounts are not as big as they should be, and neither party want to sign off on half of what they feel like they should be making for the biggest fight of the decade. Me personally, I think giving it a title like biggest fight of the decade, I think that's wrong. Because there's so many other boxers out there and so many other fights that could be made. I would say it's the biggest fight in boxing today, this year, right now. You know, next year we might get a better fight. You know, once again, this fight, the talent levels are so high in this fight that there's always a possibility of it being a stalemate fight, or when the fighters actually do get in the ring with each other, there's not a lot of action because the talent levels are so high. So we actually have to see the fight play out before we can call anything. But I think the hype around the fight is pretty much the biggest that you're going to see in the sport of boxing right now. I don't think there's two other active fighters that I can mention that would be a bigger fight than that. And the unfortunate thing about boxing is, even if you put the two most popular fighters in the sport of boxing in the ring together, it still might not sell. It's just the times of boxing. You know, boxing has taken a big hit since Maypac 1, and MMA's been really kicking the crap out of boxing since Maypac 1. You know, boxing hasn't found a way to reinvent itself yet. They just keep doing the same thing over and over and trying to reinvent the wheel for no reason, instead of just coming out with a whole new formula and starting to give fans what they really want as far as the fights being made. Boxing just kind of takes the shotgun and blows his other foot off. I don't know why. I understand why, promoters control the sport, and as long as the promoters control the sport, they're going to do boxing the way they feel like it should be done. They're going to force the fans to accept boxing the way it is, and they're never going to refine it or change it, because refining it or changing it could affect their bottom line, their dollars. And they're never going to affect their dollars, because they want to make what they want to make. And if they got to give you a crappy product just to make what they're going to make, that's what they're going to do. So I can agree, at the moment, this is the biggest fight of the decade, if you want to call it that. But I think because the decade's just getting started and there's so many other fighters and so many other fights that could be made, I think it would be wrong to say that Spence versus Crawford is the biggest fight of the decade. Now, okay, let's say Spence and Crawford happens. It's a good fight. It ends up being a rematch fight. They have two good rematches, but it doesn't sell well. And then Spence goes on to fight Charlo or someone else, a great name at 154. And that fight sells better than Spence versus Crawford. Does that make that fight the fight of the decade? I think a lot of people are speaking way too soon. I think a lot of people are not thinking it out completely, what they're saying. We are, in 2022? We're only 2 years into this decade. You got 8 more years of this decade. So, for you to say that this is the fight of the decade, I highly, highly doubt it. There's a chance that Spence and Manny Pacquiao might get it on. What if Manny Pacquiao gets in there and knocks Errol Spence out and becomes the oldest unified champion of the world and end up getting all 3 of those belts? Why wouldn't that be the fight of the decade? Or maybe Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury 4, maybe Clarissa Shields end up fighting somebody and a women's fight will end up being the fight of the decade. I think we're way too early into this decade to start talking fight of the decade. You're going to have to give it about 6 more years before you start talking that type of mess. And as far as Spence and Crawford go, man, we still might not get this fight. I mean, I know we're close, and the negotiation is still ongoing, but there's still a chance that you might not get this fight. And I know everybody wants to blame the other side for why it's not happening, and Crawford fans feel like it's Spence and PBC, they're lowballing Terence Crawford somehow. I don't know. It is what it is. Here's the funny thing about people saying that they're lowballing Terence Crawford. What else does Terence Crawford have on the table? Somebody riddle me this question. Answer me that question. What else does Terence Crawford have on the table that he's going to make that type of money other than going and trying to get a Manny Pacquiao fight? There is no other fight that makes him the dollar amount that the Errol Spence fight is going to make him. None. Not one. Nada. Zip. Zero. Zenilte. It's funny that people are trying to make it seem like they're lowballing him, but he has no other options at 147. Neither one of these guys have another option at 147. If Spence takes another 147 fight that's not Crawford, the fans are going to chew him up. If Crawford takes another 147 fight that's not Spence, the fans are going to chew him up. If one of these guys move up to 154 without fighting the other one, the fans are going to chew him up. And that's pretty much the end of their career. So they're both stuck between a rock and a hard place. There is nowhere else to go, and both of these guys are going to make nice money, good money off of that fight. The reality of the situation is there is no other option for either one of you guys. Now, y'all can stalemate this thing out in negotiations as long as you want to, but you're only getting older, and you're only giving Boots and Virgil and Sindonius and all these other guys an opportunity to make themselves more popular and to refine their skills even better. So when they meet you in the ring, they're going to end up whooping your tail. So it would behoove both of these guys just to go ahead and get it on, get it over with, give the fans what they want before this whole situation turns on them and they end up with all the egg on their face. Hit that like button for me. Share, subscribe. Tell a friend. Holler at me on all social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. More than likely to get a response on the tube, so holler at me over there if you want a response. It's your boy, Cardinal, Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me. And we or
I ain't even gotta do too much talking, cause I know what's gonna happen come Saturday.
Yeah. Is you ready for me? 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 Nigga. Spotless. Check it. Check it. Is you ready for me?